Everybody, and a very warm welcome to this afternoon's Hangout. I'm Elaine Marsden from Hangouts for Business, and I am so delighted to have with me Glyn Cheeseman from CMX Computing. Now, Glyn has spent a lifetime, as he's described, as a techie. He grew up in a technical family. He studied electronics in university, but he was really involved with computers from the beginning. And he started work as an electronics design engineer, worked with phone lines for 15 years, and this was way before the era of PCs, but soon became very involved and was on Bang & Olufsen's technical committee for 2 years. He then moved to CMX Computing in 1982 when it was in its infancy, and he moved from technical director all the way up to the top, became MD. And he's now got a PhD in computer science, so we are in safe hands here today with over 30 years of computer experience. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Glyn. Hello, Glyn. How are you?
Hello, everybody. Oh, I'm fine. I'm really looking forward to this as well.
Oh, excellent. With a topic like viruses, Trojans, and phishing, I mean, we're all so much affected by this, and you know, there's been lots of scare stories in the news recently. I mean, how do you know? How do you know if you've got one of these viruses? I mean, what's the first thing to check, Glyn?
Well, first of all, you don't always know if you've got one, because if they're really clever, they'll actually do it in such a way that you don't know it's happening, and that's one of the biggest dangers. But generally, if it's software that's got into your machine and it's doing things and tracing, it's just going to go a little bit slower, a lot slower, really slow, and then it'll almost stop working, and you wonder how to make it work. And that's probably the most common thing of all.
So let's start at the beginning then, and try and explain the categories of things that can attack our computer. What's the difference between Trojans and viruses?
Well, there's all sorts of things. I mean, there's a list as long as your arm, because every particular variety has its own name and its own explanation. Some of them are fairly obvious, like a Trojan. It gets into your computer. It opens the door for everybody else to get in, following the Greek myth of Troy. Then you've got a virus, which will replicate itself, cause damage, destroy files and things like that. So each of them have got different names. Then there's different sorts of attacks. Overall, anything that does your computer harm is called malware. Then you divide it down and to say, okay, we've got, for instance, phishing attacks. That's somebody actually sending you an email and trying to get you to open their stuff up. A virus, which is attacking a machine. The Trojans I mentioned as well. Spyware you get from going onto different websites. So there's lots of ways of actually getting in. I think the most common way at the moment, and it's when you mentioned earlier the new virus out, which is sort of the Go Zeus, as it's known under other names as well.
Game Over Zeus. I've looked that up. Game Over Zeus and Crypto Lockers. You couldn't make these names up.
Well, CryptoLocker, I think, was actually made up by the people that sort of actually produced that one, and the Game Over Zeus, it's a name that people conjure up, and it just sort of sticks there. But the CryptoLocker and Game Over Zeus, they've actually been known about for quite a long time, but it's only now they've got into the news that everybody's going, oh my dear, because the NCA and the Americans and everybody have actually blocked what they're doing. For instance, the Game Over Zeus is what's known as a bot. What it does is it gets into your computer, it then connects over the internet with all other bots and things like that to form like an inner network. And what they're doing is, this particular one, the Game Over Zeus, is it looks at what you're doing as you're on the internet, and if you do anything that looks financial, like banking or whatever, it starts noting all your passwords, usernames, everything like that, and then sends that information off to this central machine, which apparently is owned by a Russian, but whether that's true or not, I don't know. But that particular one is a botnet. The other thing of opening them up, like the CryptoLocker, we had a client who sent a parcel to Spain. They then received an email from the post office and saying, you've recently sent a parcel. This then made them think, oh, right, okay, we sent a parcel. Oh, there's an attachment. They opened the attachment. and then before they know it, they're actually infected. But the program called CryptoLocker was working away in the background, actually encoding all their files so they couldn't access it. Then when it had got so far, it puts a message on the screen saying, send us some money and we'll uncode it for you. And it's ransomware. So there's lots and lots and lots of these names, and rather than sort of confuse them all, they're basically all malware. And they are there. Originally, people wrote things just to sort of because they wanted the fame and notoriety of stopping computers working. Then it became like mindless vandalism. Now it's the criminals. And the criminals are more dangerous because they don't want to be detected.
And you know, is there any end to this? I mean, how can we protect ourselves?
Well, you can actually do a number of things to protect yourself, and a lot of it is obvious common sense. So the thing is that when you do get an email that has got something in there, I mean, if you don't bank with Halifax and you have an email from Halifax, you don't think anything about it. If you bank with Lloyd's and you see a Lloyd's email pop up, all skepticism seems to go, and people think, "Oh, it's my bank talking to me," and without thinking, they go and open an attachment, and before they know it, they're then infected. But basically, ensure your system software is up to date. So always go and do the updates.
Right.
Make sure your internet security software, including antivirus packages, anti-malware, and your firewall software is up to date.
Could I just ask you about, Glyn, could I just ask you about this? Sorry for interrupting, but most people have got antivirus because we all know the names McAfee, Norton, etc. But what about malware protection? That's different. I wonder how many people have got that.
Well, you can either get a package like Malwarebytes or Spybot S&D, which will actually do a specific scan through your computer system looking for the malwares, as opposed to just purely viruses. Now, as you mentioned, the McAfee, the Nortons, there's Sophos, EsetTrend, there's loads of these packages. They have a core antivirus package, most of them. Some of the companies also add in a malware built into it. You'll see that, for instance, with the one we use as a company is ESET, because it's got a lower overhead. When you go onto a website and stuff starts to happen, the malware happens, you'll actually get a pop-up on your screen saying, this site's known not to be that safe, or something's happening, this doesn't look right. So if you keep your software up to date, and your antivirus software up to date, and yes, some brands are better than others, and I'm not at the moment going to say don't buy this, do buy this. I have an opinion, but I'm going to keep it to myself for the moment.
People need to talk to you personally if they want to.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The paid-for packages are the ones to go for, but again, some are better than others. But if you've got that and it's up to date, they normally will do a fairly good job. But any malware, what it's trying to do first of all is disable your antivirus. It's the first job it will try and do. You know, it's a bit like if you've got a policeman standing outside your house, you try and get rid of him first before you break in. Same thing with antivirus.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's keeping that up to date and sort of making sure that you do a scan occasionally. And back to the malware stuff. If you go onto a website like Trend, they actually have an online checker where you don't actually have to buy their product, but you can go onto their website and you can do a check for the Game Over Zeus and other malware, including CryptoLocker. It will actually check through your machine.
So what is that site called? Trend.com, is it?
Well, it's Trend. Just type into Google Trend House Call.
Trend. What was that? Sorry. Trend.
Trend. Then House Call. HOUS is a house.
Got it.
Call. That's one word. I'll tell you what. I'll put these up available later, so you can actually do something with them. And it's a free scan, and because it's not on your own machine, it actually is very, very effective. If we get a computer in that we think it's got problems with it, we will actually remove the hard disk out of that machine, put it into an antivirus machine that just does antivirus, and run it through that to actually check what's on that disk without running it. So in other words, it's a nice, safe thing to do, but it's not saying you can try at home.
No, that comes with a warning.
Absolutely, yeah. But basically, a lot of it is common sense. I mean, back to what we were talking about. If you get an email with an attachment and you're not expecting it, and it's from somebody you know, give them a ring and ask them if they've sent it. If you're expecting it, it's different. You know it's coming. But just be a little bit more skeptical about stuff you're receiving.
I find that it's terrible when you get an email saying, you know, there's a parcel for you. You need to go and collect it.
Absolutely, yes. That was the well-known one, the UPS email, and it said just open this up. But there's things like you've got a tax, you've got a tax refund. Anything, they're trying to make you open it. At the moment, the company's house emails have got their crypto locker. Some of those in there. Look at what the file is, and if it's got a zip in it, don't go near it. The other thing is, when you receive an email and it wants to send you off somewhere to go and look at something, just hover your mouse button over where it says it's going to send you. And it will actually display where it's actually going to send you. So you might see a little thing there saying, hmrconline.gov, and when you hover over there, you'll find it's sort of Fred the Thief living in Lithuania or whatever. And there's an apology to anybody living in Lithuania called Fred.
Okay.
That gives you the real background behind it. But yeah, the other thing is avoid storing passwords on your computer. If you've got to store them somewhere, and the longer the password, the more complicated it is, the better, then use a little program such as KeyPass. They're free, these key encryption programs, and you get one master key, password, which is very, very complicated. You get in with that, and you can then list all your other passwords. But the nice thing about those is that they are secure, they are safe.
Because I've just set one up, LastPass, I think it is, and it seems good, but I hope it's safe. I guess it is. But you are recommending sites like that to store passwords.
Yeah, with all of these things, I mean, the one that I'm talking about actually stores it on your own machine, which sounds dangerous, but it is actually encrypted. Now, the thing is, the people that want your information are always going to be a few steps ahead of us. So the thing is that, yes, it's safe to put it on your machine now, but next week it might not be. So the other alternative is get yourself a little book, write it down. But remember that if you lose your book, somebody's got access to things. So there is no perfect answer that's always going to be 100%. So as I say, it's a lot of common sense. I mean, there are some people that say don't ever store a password on your computer. Yeah, it's good advice. But also it's really awkward to use a computer if you don't know your passwords.
I like that old school advice. Get a little notebook and write it there.
Well, the thing is, provided you don't get broken into, you've actually got just words down there, but they don't mean anything to anybody unless they know what site they relate to. So you can actually put a little code in there because you know what your logon name is, and have a different logon name and password. I hate to say this, for every site you go to, because recently, as you know, eBay, they were actually their details were taken away by people who later on published some of these to prove they were correct. eBay said they weren't necessarily the right ones, but it's funny how they then turned around and told everybody to change their passwords. And the really, really annoying thing was this happened in February. It took them until May to actually say that they'd been raided. And it's happened to eBay, it's happened to Adobe, I think Facebook, it's virtually everybody, this happens to. So I hate to say this, change your passwords, make sure that they're quite long, and have different ones for different sites.
That's being very thorough. So what should you do in an emergency then? If you think, oh, my computer's so slow, it's never been this slow, and you're worried, what should you do?
If it's something simple like it's just beginning to run slow and you think you've got a problem, then if you download a product called Malwarebytes, go to the Trend website as well, run each of these programs, they're free, and they will actually manage to sort a lot of the problems out for you. Now, the thing is, that's if it's a mild infection. Or take it into the people that supplied your computer system, or ask them to have a look at it. They can possibly go online and check it for you, or put it onto a jig and actually look through it. Most people will actually do a quick inspection like that without charging. It's one of these things that you can have a machine running on the side without actually sort of spending hours at it. But if you suspect anything, then check it. Machines do slow down with age anyway because you put more and more stuff on them. but go and check it, because the consequences of not checking it, it's going to cost you money.
Yes.
Simple as that.
Now, Glyn, you know, for example, if somebody receives an email that's obviously a phishing attack, are you threatening all the people in your address book? Is that how it would work?
It can happen, because the thing is that they can actually, with a phishing attack, is where they'll send you an email and you click on something or open something. And the difficulty is that what you might see on the screen is, you know, sort of, would you like to enter a free lottery or fill in a survey, yes or no? Some of them can actually be genuine. And if you click on the no, what's actually happening behind is, please download my address book. So you're actually never know quite what the instructions are. So it's a question of actually being sensible and being safe. If you're on, say, the Daily Telegraph, and the Daily Telegraph comes up and says, would you like to actually be one of our dealer panel, reader panels, then you've got a fairly good idea that's quite safe. If it's in an email and it comes up and says, you know, sort of, would you like a free ticket to go to Australia, the chances are that isn't safe. So it's using common sense. Back to one of the things you also said about how do you know if your machine's infected. If it really starts becoming a real problem, and like CryptoLocker pops up on the screen, close your machine down very quickly, very simply, pull the plug. Because you're not going to make any more damage than has already happened, but you might stop further damage happening to the machine.
So it's a bit like well, the term virus is very apt. Then you just get worse and worse, and well, I don't know if there's a cure for viruses, computer viruses. You know, once you've got them.
Well, your antivirus package will actually disinfect your machine. It will remove the virus, but sometimes they get into a program and they tend to be sort of self-replicating and burrow away. You can end up with damaged files. And that's when the most important thing of all is make sure you've got backups. And it's the one thing that people forget about. It's always going to be done next week or the week after. And the more backups you've got, the better things are, because you can go back several generations and pick up different files. But that's almost the subject of another Hangout, isn't it? Backups.
Oh, I think so. But if anyone's listening today and they're not sure about whether they've got a backup, please make it a priority, because you don't want to be in a position where you've lost everything. And you know, maybe we'll talk to you again, Glyn, about the backup technique and what you recommend there. So, what's next then with these viruses and Trojans? Can you predict the future?
Well, as I said, they're actually ahead of us. So the thing is that anybody that's trying to crack a machine and undo it and get the data out of it, they are always going to be a few steps ahead. Because the other thing is, there's a thing called exploits. Do you remember the Heartbleed? Do you remember the Heartbleed that came up? Well, basically, you've got viruses, you've got spyware, you've got all things like that, but some of the machines can also be got into, some of the big servers can be got into, because there are holes, if you like, and this is where updates and patches come on. So it tends to be the break-fix model rather than anticipating, because you're never quite sure what somebody's going to develop next. These guys are basically driven by greed, they're criminal-backed, and it's trying to get to a position where you can stop them doing things, and unfortunately I think it's always going to be reactive. I don't think you're going to be able to predict the next virus.
How is a virus created anyway? How do they build these things?
Well, there's several ways you can actually do it. I don't know if I should actually go into this in great depth, but believe it or not, there are websites that you can go to. And you can actually, I don't know if I should actually say that, but there are websites you can go to create a virus. They are taken down sort of quite regularly, but that's one way of doing it. The other way is to actually sort of sit down and write the code itself. And it's an incredibly large subject, how to get viruses into computers.
Mm.
I mean, a lot of people think that the iPhones, Apples and everything are totally virus free and always will be.
Mm.
Well, no, there are ways of getting into those as well, and there are things that can be exploited. It's just whether there's the demand. And there's been a thing recently about turning iPhones into bricks by actually sort of infecting them as well. And you can now buy antivirus for mobile phones, Android, and virtually any device. So that might be the next big thing. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because you do feel that your mobile phone is safe, and you don't need to worry, particularly if you've got an Apple. So it's quite interesting to know that there's obviously people in the marketplace who've realised there's a threat, and they've got products to help with that.
Yes, I think it's one of these things that if you've got something that somebody else wants and they're sort of criminally based, they're going to find a way of getting it. And I think that is one of the hardest things of all, to try and predict, to try and stop, and try and preempt. It's not them just trying to get in. It's all about the user of every device being careful.
Yeah,
that's the one guaranteed thing. If you're careful, you will avoid a lot of the pitfalls and traps.
So it's antivirus, malware software, taking regular backups, and just keeping an eye on things.
Absolutely.
Checking your emails as well. Don't open anything with a dodgy attachment, any zip files. Just those simple things can keep you safe.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, don't forget that the people that supplied your computers or your software or whatever, they're up to date or should be on what's going on. In fact, just before this broadcast, I received an email from somebody that you know as well, because we were discussing it before we came on air. And he said, is this a genuine email? Is this okay? And in fact, the email itself was okay. The advice was good. Everything about it was absolutely fine. He wasn't sure. He called somebody. He called us. I gave him the answer. And that also is another thing to have as well.
Yes, I think having peace of mind is important. Somebody that you can turn to, that you can trust, because we're so busy doing things, we can't always know what's the right thing to do. So listen, Glyn, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? So you've got all this experience with working with computers. Maybe you could tell us, what's the worst situation you've come across with an infected computer? Have you got anything you'd like us, any horror stories that we can end with?
Well, just before I go on to some horror stories, one thing I would say is that we actually have a list of things we do when we've got a machine that we think is infected, and it's all the programs we run, in what order that we run. I did actually have a look at our website, and it's a little bit out of date. We've changed it, so I've taken that off at the moment, but I'll actually be putting it on the blog of what people can do, and it's a thing you can do step by step and sort of to keep yourself safe. Horror stories. The trouble is, there are almost too many to mention, I hate to say.
Oh, just tell us one. Just tell us one.
Probably the worst one was somebody, it's got to be CryptoLocker, there's no two ways about it. And it was somebody who phoned up, and they said they've got this big red thing on their screen, and they're not sure what to do. And they said they're demanding money with menaces, so to speak. So we actually sort of said, well, pull the plug, we'll get down there and have a look, knowing what it was. Went down there, and every single file on that machine and another machine on the network were all totally encrypted. And the idea was it had done all the damage and then said, I'm here. So I said to him, have you got your backups? Oh, we haven't got any. Right, okay, what have you got? And he said, well, we haven't actually got anything.
Oh, dear.
And he said, as long as I've got a spreadsheet, which has actually got all our costings for a job we're on at the moment that we're about to invoice for. And he went in there, and it was actually all encrypted. So we then went through and said, well, look, have you faxed anything to anybody? Have you got your invoices? And he virtually had to go and totally rebuild that before he could invoice his client. And it took him around about 5 to 6 days just putting the stuff back together. He couldn't get on with his normal job. That was what he was doing. It caused a delay in payment. It was just a knock-on. So that particular horror story is something that started very simply, and it ended up costing somebody money. The only other horror story actually is somebody who was having money taken out of their bank account, very small amounts on a business bank account by using credit card, and they were taking £18 out or £80 or 36, different amounts, different times of the day, and it was always below the £100 limit, so it wouldn't raise any alarms. And we sort of were talking about with this client, we found this particular thing that we'd just taken them over as a client, and we reckon they'd actually emptied their bank account of £8,500 in little amounts. Because it was a big company, because they had lots of transactions, the smaller amounts were just being skipped and not checked. So other party horror story, check your bank statements.
Oh, absolutely. Well, do you know, I think that's interesting. You know, it's not always good to end on a horror story, but hopefully it's made us all aware of how careful we've got to be. And just to go over what Glyn has said, that he's got a blog post that he's going to be putting a step-by-step list of instructions on what to do to keep your computers safe. So if you go to cmx.co.uk/news, there'll be an opportunity for you to sign up for this blog post. And you know, get in touch with Glyn if you have got questions. I'm sure Glyn won't mind. So that's absolutely fantastic. I think we've lost Glyn, but I'm just going to say thanks everyone for tuning in, and we're going to have another show next week on Thursday, so hopefully see you then. Bye for now.